So my purpose in making this video is to address some of the concerns that I've heard people express about coming to NCU, and in a few cases I've talked to people who said for a long time they really felt drawn to NCU, but they decided against it, and they listed one of these as the reasons. Now, before I go any further, what I want to make very plain is I do not believe in the hard sell. I have never believed in the hard sell, and so I'm never going to try to talk you into coming to NCU, and if you were to come, I won't really try to talk you into doing much of anything. One of the ideas that really drives my teaching is I don't tell adults what to do. I just tell them what I predict will happen if they do certain things. And it's my belief when it comes to selecting a college that what you ought to do is you ought to learn as much as you can about the colleges, you ought to pray about it a lot, and then you ought to watch and listen very carefully for where God is leading you. And I think it's the case that a lot of people try to follow that process, but there are a couple of issues that get in the way, and those are the ones that I want to take. And the first one is that occasionally I hear really high caliber students say, well, I like NCU, I like the feel on the campus, I like the faculty that I've met, I like what kinds of things I've seen go on in the classroom, how the learning happens, what the learning environment is like. But then I look at rankings, and I look at the reputations that different colleges have, and I've been accepted to these other colleges that are frankly more widely recognized, where a degree from them is going to open more doors for me down the road. Well, I have a couple things to say about that. The first thing is, from my past experience when I was a college debater doing NDT debate for Baylor, I knew students who went to a lot of those high-caliber schools. I had good friends who went to Harvard. I had good friends who went to a lot of Ivy League schools and a lot of really top-flight, high-caliber schools. And I saw during that time, I saw some people go to schools like that and just completely spin their wheels. Lack motivation, not fit in, not really find a faculty member that they could click with and that could serve as a mentor for them, that they found the whole experience just very empty. And I have also seen students who went to really tiny out-of-the-way podunk schools, and they really, because of their motivation and because of the fit and because of the way that the chemistry came together, they gave themselves a world-class education. I was just last week, as a matter of fact, reading Malcolm Gladwell's latest book, Outliers, and at one point he goes through a list of Nobel Prize winners in the hard sciences, and you'd be surprised because not that many of them came from schools that you would recognize. His argument is that if the caliber of the student population is above a certain level, then it's good enough. And the collective atmosphere, the learning environment that you'll find in a school like that, someone who's got a lot of talent, if they fit, if they put down roots, then they're going to be able to realize their full potential. So if I were you, I would not get too carried away by things like reputation, by the sort of rough measures of the caliber of a school that get publicized and that make it into print. There's a second thing that I would keep in mind if I were you, and that is, as John wrote in 1 John chapter 2, don't love the world or anything of the world, because the things of the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride in one's lifestyle, it really occurs to me that when we give too much weight to human-created rankings for colleges, what we're doing is we are giving into the measurements that are of the world. And if you feel, when you pray over where you feel like you're being sent, if you're really trying to pay attention to how is God ordering your steps, when you trust in Him with all your heart and don't incline to your own understanding, if you feel like He's leading you to a school that's out of the way, not necessarily NCU, there are other schools that could be, but if you feel like the path that He's leading you down is leading you away from human measures like high caliber schools, then really if you try to go by, I've gotten into a very prestigious school and it feels very comforting and it feels very safe to proceed with that because when I have a degree from that school, potential employers are going to recognize that. Well, that may be selling God short. And that may be plugging in, and that may be giving in to how the world measures things and not being sufficiently attuned to what God is trying to do in your life. I mean, if you think that it's out of the question that God could arrange for you to have the perfect education for His purposes for you on a small, out-of-the-way campus, well, there are all sorts of stories in the Bible where God used people who were out of the way, and God used regions and towns and events that took place far, far away from where the movers and the shakers and the powerful people were. So, the chief thing is that I think you ought to be seeking your Father's will in this. And it's my hope that just about everybody who's watching this has done so. And so my purpose is not to instruct you and not to talk down to you, but just to give you a little encouragement that if you have a long list of options, and some of them look so good that if you turned them down, your friends and your family would say, "What are you thinking? This is a great opportunity." Well, it may be a great opportunity measured in human terms, and that may not be the end of the question. The second concern I sometimes hear expressed is, well, we've looked at how much it's going to cost to go to NCU, and we've looked at how much it's going to cost to go to X other school, and even though NCU feels like the right choice and the right fit, it just makes more economic sense to go to another school. Well, here's what I have to say about that. First of all, what I am not saying go out, be reckless, rack up a lot of student loan debts, do whatever you have to do to pay the tuition tab at NCU. Because I think the Bible teaches that we're not to be foolish with our money. And I think that if your best judgment after praying, after seeking the Father's will, is that it would be a foolish use of your money to come here, then honor that. Then be obedient to the Father in not being foolish with your money. But what I'm afraid happens sometimes, I can think of a couple of prospective students that I'm pretty confident have done this, that very early in the process, they looked into NCU, they visited the campus, they really felt drawn to it, they prayed about it, and really felt as though what was opening up, that things were being arranged to where this was where they ought to go. And then, very early in the process, they crunched the numbers and decided to go someplace else. What I think is a very good idea, and what I hope that you feel the confidence and the boldness to step out in faith to do, is if you've begun the process, continue the process for a while. Don't settle the decision. And pray and see what kinds of unexpected things may happen. Pray and see how the financial parameters in which you operate might change. I had a colleague at the school I taught at back in Texas, and what she encouraged her son to do his senior year in high school, she went out and got the biggest, thickest phone book-sized guide to scholarships that she could find. And they still publish those. More and more they're moving online. But for what I'm about to describe, there's nothing like a book. Because what he did is he didn't do any searching. Instead, he didn't go to the index and look up search terms. Instead, he paged through it. He looked at every single scholarship. It took him months to do this. Had a highlighter in his hand, and he would look at who's eligible, and every single one he was eligible for, even if it was far-fetched, he highlighted it. Then sat down and, in a very mechanical way, put together the application materials for every scholarship that he was eligible for. And it turns out he went to school free. And he actually had a couple of stipends that provided him with money for expenses as well. Some of those scholarships that he applied for, he felt incredibly silly because he thought it was so far-fetched that he could possibly get them. He got a lot of those. So, as far as the money situation, it says in James 4 that when we talk about what's going to happen, where we will go, what we will do tomorrow, all we are is a vapor. All we are just God's temporary deployed force. And God is constantly changing our operating parameters. So it's definitely important that you be a wise steward of your resources, but it's also important that you not arrive at a settled decision what to do with those resources too quickly. Because when you do, that really kind of betrays a lack of faith. It could be that you continue to follow God's lead for a while, and it could be that you watch and you listen and you pray and you say, God, if you're drawing me to this, then help me see how I'm going to be able to afford it. We have a couple of students, I'm thinking of one in particular who was in my first year seminar class, who went like that week after week after week thinking, God, this just feels like where you want me, but boy, can I not afford it. And then one afternoon she got a phone call. And she had qualified for a scholarship that she had honestly never heard of, but had put together materials after someone mentioned it to her, and it just brought it to the exact number that she needed, she needed for the cost of going to school to be to where the family could swing it. And because she didn't shut down the idea, because she didn't say, okay, I'm going to take the safe and prudent way early in the process, she was able to be bold, and God delivered to her exactly what she needed to follow the leading that she had felt. So, to sum that back up again, if you're worrying about how nobody you know seems to have heard of the school, you don't know that much about the reputation of the school, well, come and see for yourself what kind of learning takes place here and what kind of community we have here, and pray on it. And if it feels right, don't worry about rankings, don't worry about reputation. Those are the measures of the world. And it's been my experience with my own eyes that people who follow those measures, very often the outcome they get is not really the outcome they were looking for. When it comes to money, by all means, be wise with your money. Don't plunge ahead foolishly. Don't put the Lord your God to a foolish test. But if you feel led, don't let money shut down your willingness to follow that leading. Because very often, when we show that we are willing to walk by faith and not by sight, God provides exactly what we need. So, keep those in mind as encouragement, not as admonishment, not as talking down, but just as food for thought. And as always, if you have questions or issues about what it would take and what it would be like to be here at NCU, I am here and would be very happy to answer those questions.